just gonna set it up. I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. I like that. Just vibing right now. Don't be sad. Open your eyes. The sun is shining. The angels are dancing in heaven. You hear me?
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Yes. Greetings, family. Greetings. This is Brother Jegna, the brother of the Africans Afrocentricity Bookman today. And another Sunday, another 4 till 6 o'clock. The Afrocentricity Bookman show is here again. We are continuing to read The Black Skin, White Mask by the great scholar Frantz Fanon. We are on chapter 3. I must remind you before we make a start that this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. You can get Glass Are Us at 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. That's Glass Are Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. So please go to Glass Are Us for all your glazing needs, whether it's glass repairs, or double glazing, shelving, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles, balustrades, balconies, glass. Please go to Glass Are Us so you can get them on 0208 800 6663. That is Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. If you mention this show, the Afrocentricity Bookman Show, you'll get a nice 10% discount on all your purchases. So let's continue. I hope you had a great week here. We're going to continue reading this book. The general focus or the background of Black Skin, White Mask by Frantz Fanon is that he examined the black mind, the mind of the African, the mind of the black person. He uses the term Negro a lot because that was maybe in the 50s as the term was being used just after the war. But really, when we do not have our own definitions of who we are, where we should be going, of our self-concept, and things like that, then we use the concept of other people. We define ourselves from the view of other people. And as we're saying right now in this chapter, it develops a neurosis in the mind of the person who does not have his own definitions. So it's critical that we have our own definitions of what of the world around us, who we are, who our friends are, who our enemies are. When we go to a shop, we need to carry out a good analysis. Does it benefit me or is it against me? Does it harm me? If we go into a bank, we read a newspaper, we read a book, watch a film, TV, anything like that, we must always analyse everything that comes in contact with us, because there are many things in the world which are very negative towards us, which harm us, our family, our community, our nation. So we need to analyse everything that comes in contact with us. And if it's against us, against our culture, our values, our best interests, We must just reject it. And that is really the concept of Afrocentricity. So Frantz Fanon is really, is talking about in the book really, that when we do not have our own definitions of the world around us and we adopt definitions, particularly if we adopt the definitions of people who actually dislike us or rather hate us, then we begin to hate ourselves. We began to have a negative self-concept. So this is what the book's around. So we're going to go around this. So when you have a negative self-concept, obviously it creates pain in your body. It's kind of natural. So when you have pain in your body, you do everything you can to get rid of that pain. So if you have a knowledge of self, the way you get rid of the pain is to focus on who you are. Move towards, gravitate towards your center. However, when you do not have a knowledge of self, what gives away the pain, you kind of move towards maybe the cause of the pain. Try to be like the people who are defining you. But unfortunately, as we'll see as we go through the book, that just causes more pain. Key thing is we must be ourselves. So we're on chapter 3. Chapter 3 is called The Man of Color and the White Woman. And I am starting again from page 59. So this is the Afrocentricity Bookman show. This is Black Skin, White Mask, the classic book written by Frantz Fanon. And I begin. So the neurotic structure of an individual is simply the elaboration, the formation, the eruption within the ego. A conflictual clusters arising, in part out of the environment, and in part out of the purely personal way in which that individual reacts to his influences. Just as there was a torch of fraud in trying to deduce from the behavior of Nini and Mayette. So if he's listening, I interrupt here very quickly. If he's listening last week, Nini and Mayette are females from the Caribbean. These are people of African descent. But their concept of themselves is really, their world is really whiteness. And we get a lot of the comments that they gravitate towards whiteness and move away from their Africanness. So the behavior of Nini and Mayat Capicha, a general law of the behavior of the black woman with the white man. There would be a similar lack of objectivity. I believe in trying to extend the attitude of Venise to the man of colour as such. And I should like to think that I have discouraged any endeavours to connect the defeats of Jean Venise with the greater or lesser concentration of melanin in his epidermis. This sexual myth, the quest for white flesh perpetuated by alienated psyches, must no longer be allowed to impede active understanding. In no way should my colour be regarded as a flaw. And I think that's a very critical point there. Because we are told that our blackness, our Africanness, is a flaw in our character. But when you know yourself, you know that we are the original people of the planet. How can it be a flaw? We are created by the Creator. Does the Creator, regardless if you believe in religion or not, does the Creator create flaws? How can his original people be flawed? From the moment the Negro accepts the separation imposed by Europeans, he has no further respite, and it is not understandable that thenceforth he will try to elevate himself to the white man's level, to elevate himself in a range of colours to which he attributes a kind of hierarchy. We shall see that another solution is possible. It implies a restructuring of the world. So I agree with that 100%. We need to restructure the world around us in our own image. I think that's what Frantz Fanon is saying here. Because when you do not have your definitions, or if your mind is trapped in Eurocentrism, your definitions of the world or definitions of a man or woman is white. So we always want to measure ourselves. Oh, am I white enough? Is my hair stringy enough? Is my skin pale enough? Is my nose pointy enough? So if there are a rule, we're never going to measure up, are we? We're never going to measure up. But still their behavior is European culture. as black people, as African people, our culture has to be African culture. It's just natural. All mature people live within their own culture, not in the culture of other people. And we are the most mature people on the planet. But obviously our recent history, unfortunately, we have been knocked off our own terms. We've been moved off our African center. So we adopt things, believe things, which are not from our center, but from the definitions that other people gave us. So what Frantz Fanon is saying here is that we need to restructure our thinking, restructure our world around us. We cannot think about elevating ourselves as to be somebody else. Why would you want to be anything else? If the Creator has made us Africans, there's no room in the world for us to be anything else. So that is the end of chapter 3. So chapter 4, the so-called dependency complex of colonized people. So he's particularly speaking about African people, but he's black people. But he's also speaking about really all colonized people, whether there was Arabs, Asians, whoever, yeah? Okay, so this is chapter 4. Remember, this is the Afrocentricity Bookman show. This is Brother Jegna. We are reading Black Skin and White Masks by Frantz Fanon. So this is chapter 4, the so-called dependency complex of colonized people. So I've got a quote here by Amy Cesar. Amy Cesar was one of the teachers of Frantz Fanon when he was a child. In the whole world, no poor devil is lynched. No wretch is tortured, in whom I too am not degraded and murdered. So there's a quote from Amy Cesar. Amy Cesar created the concept of negritude. So you can look that up, negritude. If you want to Google that and do a bit of research on that. So I continue, chapter 4. When I embarked on this study, only a few essays by Manoni, published in a magazine called Psych, were available to me. I was thinking of writing to M. Manoni to ask about the conclusions to which his investigations had led him. Later I learned that he had gathered his reflections in a forthcoming book. It has now been published, Prospero and Caliban, The Psychology of Colonization. So let us examine it. Before going into details, I should like to say that its analytical thought is honest. Having lived under the extreme ambivalence inherent in colonial situation, M. Manoni, must be Monsieur, has managed to achieve a grasp, unfortunately too exhaustive, of the psychological phenomena that governs the relations between the colonized and the colonizer. The basic characteristic of current psychological research seems to be the achievement of a certain exhaustiveness. But one should not lose sight of the real. I propose to show that, although he has devoted 225 pages to the study of the colonial situation, Monsieur Manoni has not understood its real coordinates. When one approaches the problem, it's as important as that of taking an inventory of the possibilities for understanding between two different peoples. One should be doubly careful. So I mentioned last week, because Frantz Fanon is an academic, some of the concepts, ideas he uses are very kind of academic. So I'll try to break it down the best I can, so we all gain a general good understanding. Mr. Manoni deserves our thanks for having introduced into the procedures two elements whose importance can never again escape anyone. A quick analysis had seemed to avoid subjectivity in this field. Monsieur Manoni's study is sincere in purpose, for it proposes to prove the impossibility of explaining man outside of the limits of his capacity for accepting or denying a given situation. Thus, the problem of colonialism includes not only the interrelations of the objective historical conditions, but also human attitudes towards those conditions. So he's not just saying, I think he's saying there's not just really looking at the conditions objectively, standing away, but you also must study human attitudes towards the conditions that they are living in. Similarly, I can subscribe that part of Monsieur Manoni's work that tends to present the pathology of the conflict. That is, to show that the white colonial is motivated only by his desire to put an end to a feeling of unsatisfaction on the level of Alderian overcompensation. At the same time, I find myself opposing him when I read a sentence like this, in speech marks, the fact that when an adult Malagasy, I think maybe from Malagasy, is isolated in a different environment, he can become susceptible to the classical type of inferiority complex, proves beyond doubt that the germ of the complex was latent in him from childhood. So let me analyze that myself. He could be right. Okay, he's saying that when somebody's talking about Malagasy in this point, but he could be an African, for example, when they become susceptible to a certain type, or a classical type, he says here, of inferiority complex, it proves beyond doubt that the germ of the complex was latent in him from his childhood. So it depends what his childhood was. I'm thinking he was saying that maybe he's growing up. I thought he was saying that maybe when he was born, it's inherent in him. But it seems like, as we go through, we'll see, maybe his education from young and a germ of inferiority was put into his psyche from young. In reading this, one feels something turned upside down, and the author's objectivity, in speech marks, threatens to lead one into error. Nevertheless, I have tried zealously to retrace his line of orientation, the fundamental theme of his book. In speech marks, the central idea is that the confrontation of civilized and primitive men creates a special situation, the colonial situation, and brings about the emergence of a mass of illusions and misunderstandings that only a psychological analysis can place and define. So now, since Monsieur Manoni point of departure, since this is Monsieur Manoni's point of departure, why does he try to make the inferiority complex something that antedates colonization? Good, okay. So it's a bit clear now. Frantz Fanon is saying that this man's research, he's saying that there was an inferiority complex in these people before they were colonized, which would be a lie. Why would people have an inferiority complex? Inferiority complex is something that is imposed on people in the colonial situation. A young child, maybe, take it out of the colonial situation. Say you're at school, for example, a young boy, and maybe you're terrible with numbers. Maybe you may get a bit of low self-esteem when you're dealing with maths, for example. So this could create a bit of inferiority complex to other people who are good at maths. You might think, oh, they're better than me at a certain subject. But I believe we are talking about the colonial, the colonized, and also the colonizer. So he says that, Frantz Fanon says, now since Mr. Manoni's point of departure does not try, why does he try to make the inferiority complex something that antedates, i.e. before colonization? Here one perceives the mechanism of explanation that in psychiatry would give us this. There are latent forms of psychosis that become overt as a result of a traumatic experience. Or, in somatic medicine, the appearance of varicose veins in a patient does not arise out of his being compelled to spend 10 hours a day on his feet, but rather out of the constitutional weakness of his vein walls. His working conditions are only a complicating factor, and the insurance compensation expert to whom the case is submitted will find the responsibility of the employer extremely limited. Before taking up Monsieur Manoni's conclusion in detail, I should like to make my position clear. Once and for all, I will state that this principle, a given society is racist or it is not. Until all the evidence is available, a great number of problems will have to be put aside. Statements, for example, that the north of France is more racist than the south, that racism is the work of underlings and hence in no way involves the ruling class, that France is one of the least racist countries in the world, are the product of men incapable of straight thinking. I agree with that. In order to show that racism does not reflect an economic situation, Monsieur Manoni reminds us that in South Africa, the white labourers are quite as racialist as the employers and managers, and very often a good deal more so. I hope I may be forgiven for asking that those who take it on themselves to describe colonialism remember one thing, that it is utopian to try to ascertain in what ways a kind of inhuman behaviour differs from one kind of inhuman behaviour. I have no desire to add to the problems of the world, but I should simply like to ask Monsieur Manoni whether he does not think that for a Jew, the differences between anti-Semitism and morass, and that of Goebbels are imperceptible. Anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism, isn't it, I believe? After a presentation of the respectful prostitute in North Africa, a general remark by Sartre, this is in speech marks, it would be a good thing if your play could be put back into black Africa. It shows how much happier the black man is on French soil than his fellow Negroes are in America. Close speech marks. I sincerely believe that a subjective experience can be understood by others, and it would give me no pleasure to announce that the black problem is my problem and mine alone, and that it is up to me to study it. So he's saying, only we can take care of our own problems. We need to study it ourselves. We shouldn't rely on other people to study it. Maybe we can analyse what people have wrote about it, but ultimately it's down to us to study it. But this does not mean that Mr. Manoni has not tried to feel himself into the despair of a man of colour confronting the white man. In his work, I have made it a point to convey the misery of the black man, physically and affectionately. I have not wished to be objective. Besides, that would be dishonest. It is not possible for me to be objective. And this is a myth of Europeans, by the way. European science like to say, well, I'm being objective. When I speak about those black people, I'm being very objective. Which is a lie, because to be objective, say you came from outer space and came down, so you've got no preconceived ideas about black people, that may be objective. However, if you grew up in society, how can you be objective? If you grew up in a society, you grew up with the norms, the sayings, the songs, the books, the TV. Your mind has been shaped by all the things around you. And because this world is an extremely racist world, over the past 5 centuries in particular, but for 2,000 years in reality, then there's no way your mind cannot be shaped by those things. So when a white person says, oh, I'm being objective, it's all lies. Even if he thinks he's being objective, or she's being objective, how can you be objective? Well, you was not raised, or you didn't grow up in a vacuum. So your mind is going to be shaped from the world around you, just like we are shaped from the world around us. Okay, so I'm going to just read over. Mr. Manoni believes that the contempt of the poor whites in South Africa for the Negro has nothing to do with the economic factors. Aside from the fact that this attitude can be understood through the analogy of anti-Semitic mentality. In speech marks, thus I would call anti-Semitism a poor man's snobbery. And in fact, it would appear that the rich, for the most part, exploit this passion for their own uses rather than abandon themselves to it. They have better things to do. It is propagated mainly among the middle classes, because they possess neither land, nor house, nor castle. By treating the Jew as an inferior, a pernicious being, I affirm at the same time that I belong to the elite. We could point out that to Monsieur Manoni that the displacement of the white proletariat, i.e. the working class, aggression on the black proletariat is fundamentally a result of the economic structure of South Africa. What is South Africa? A boiler into which 13 million blacks are clubbed and penned in by 2.5 million whites. If the poor whites hate Negroes, it is not, as Mr. Manoni would have us believe, because racialism is at work, is the work of petty officials, small traders and colonials who have toiled much without great success. No, it is because the structure of South Africa is a racist structure. Negrophilism and philanthropy are pejorative in South Africa. What is proposed is the separation of the natives from the Europeans, territorially, economically, and on the political level, allowing the blacks to build their own civilization under the guidance and authority of whites, but with a minimum contact between the races. It is understood that territorial reservations would be set up for the blacks, and that most of them would have to live there. Economic competition will be eliminated, and the groundwork will be laid for the rehabilitation of poor whites, who constitute 50% of the European population. It is no exaggeration to say that the majority of South Africans feel an almost physical revulsion against anything that puts a native or a person of colour on their level. So he's saying there that the structure of the society is racist, so everybody's going to be racist. He can't say, well, the top, the ruling class are not really that racist and the middle class are racist because maybe they've got to compete with them and they haven't got like a large property, a lot of money. The whole structure of society makes people from the top to bottom, Europeans, racist. It's funny when you look back, by the way, that Europeans obviously they had beaches for white people and they call themselves Europeans, and beaches for Africans. So at one stage they said, yes, we're Europeans, we're not Africans. But now all of a sudden now they want to be Africans. Why is that? They was happy to be Europeans before when they had upper hand. But now, we're Africans. We're not really Europeans. To conclude, our consideration of Mr. Manoni's thesis, let us remember that economic exclusions results from, among other things, the fear of competition and the desire both to protect the poor white class from forms half the European population, and to prevent it from sinking any lower. Mr. Manoni adds colonial exploitation is not the same as other forms of exploitation, and colonial racialism is different from other kinds of racialism. He speaks of phenomenology, of psychoanalysis, of human brotherhood, but we should be happier if these terms had taken on a more concrete quality for him. All forms of exploitation resemble one another. They all seek the source of their necessity in some edict of a biblical nature. All forms of exploitation are identical because all of them are applied against the same object, man. When one tries to examine the structure of this or that form of exploitation, from the abstract point of view, one simply turns one's back on the major basic problem, which is that of restoring man to his proper place. Colonial racism is no different from any other racism. Anti-Semitism hits me head on. I am enraged, I am bled white by an appalling battle. I am deprived of the possibility of being a man. I cannot dissociate myself from the future that is proposed for my brother. Every one of my acts commits me as man. Every one of my silences, every one of my cowardices reveals me as a man. I feel I can still hear Cesar. So it's a quote here. When I turn on my radio, when I hear the Negroes have been lynched in America, I say that we are being lied to. Hitler is not dead. When I turn on my radio and I learn that Jews have been insulted, mistreated, persecuted, I say that we have been lied to. Hitler is not dead. And when finally I turn on my radio and hear that in Africa forced labour has been inaugurated and legalised, I say that we have certainly been lied to. Hitler is not dead. So it's a very good point there. It's a very good point there. They say that so if all this it's over, Hitler. But a lot of people today, President of the USA, for example, they have many of the same beliefs. Did you know that Sir Winston Churchill and Hitler believed in many of the same things? Eugenics. What's eugenics? That there is a superior race. And there are other people who are very inferior. And these people are inferior, we should stop them from breeding. So both Hitler and Churchill believed in these things. So even though we believe that there's completely opposite sides, and there might be different countries, but a lot of their beliefs were the same beliefs, because it's the same beliefs as Frantz Fanon just said. Within a racist structure, the beliefs are held by everybody, obviously in varying degrees. Obviously, there are people who will not actually believe it, but the vast majority believe it because they have not been, or they don't have the education or the other information to argue against it fully. And sometimes if you have been given privilege, sometimes you're happy to have that privilege and you just continue living that way because you get privilege. European civilization and its best representative are responsible for colonial racism. And I come back once more to César. So there's a quote here. Number 9. When I wrote this, I had in mind Jasper's concept of metaphysical guilt. There exists among men, because they are men, a solidarity through which each shares a responsibility for every injustice and every wrong committed in the world, and especially for crimes that are committed in his presence or at which he cannot be ignorant. If I do whatever I can to prevent them, I am an accomplice to them. My apologies. If I do not do whatever I can to prevent them, I am an accomplice to them. If I have not risked my life in order to prevent that murder of other men, if I have stood silent, I feel guilty in a sense that cannot in any adequate fashion be understood judicially or politically or morally, that I am still alive, after such things have been done, weighs on me as a guilt that cannot be expiated. Somewhere in the heart of human relations, an absolute command imposes itself. In case of a criminal attack or of living conditions that threaten physical being, accept life only for altogether, otherwise not at all. And there's a quote by Karl Jaspers. Jaspers declares that this obligation stems from God. It is easy to see that God has no business here, unless one chooses not to state the obligation as explicit human reality of feeling oneself responsible for one's fellow man. Responsible in the sense that the least of my actions revolved all mankind. Every action is an answer or a question, perhaps both. When I express a specific manner in which my being can arise above itself, I am affirming the worth of my action for others. Conversely, the passivity that is to be seen in troubled period of history is to be interpreted as a default of that obligation. Young, that's Jung, Young in aspects of the drama or contemporary drama, says that confronted by an Asiatic or a Hindu, every European has equally to answer for his crimes perpetuated by Nazi savagery. Another writer, Madame Marseille José, was able to describe the guilt of those who remained neutral during the occupation of France. In a confused way, they felt that they were responsible for all the deaths and all the Buchenwalds. So European civilization is at its best representatives. European civilization and its best representative are not, for instance, responsible for colonial racism. That is the work of the petty officials. That's Manoni again, which is false. Clearly, the system is to blame, And the system encompasses everybody who lives within that society. Somebody put it another way. This is the way, I forget the scholar, he'll come to my mind shortly. He says that when you want to think of a society, people on the street, just regular people, they just act like pawns. They will be racist to you. They might not really know why, but they are racist to you because they are the puppets. However, there are puppeteers. These are the ones who created the system. The puppeteers created the system, so they know the system was in place. But most people are just puppets, and they just act it out. If it gives them privilege, they'll just act it out because they get privilege from it. If they've got lower self-esteem, they'll act it out again because it makes them feel better about themselves. So really, when we think about society, there are puppeteers and there are puppets. As you know, the puppeteers are just one or two, or in relation to the size of the society, a very small percentage. But the puppets are people who just act out every day. And then, one lovely day, the middle class is brought up short by a staggering blow. The Gestapos are busy again. The prisons are filling up. The torturers are once more inventing, perfecting and consulting over their workbenches. People are astounded. They are angry. They say, how strange that is. But then it is only Nazism. It won't last. And they wait, and they hope, and they hide the truth from themselves. It is savagery, the supreme savagery. It crowns, it epitomizes the day-to-day savages. Yes, it is Nazism, but before they became its victims, they were the accomplices. That Nazism they tolerated before they succumbed to it. They exonerated it. They closed their eyes to it. They legitimated it. Because until then, it had been employed only against non-European people. The Nazis, they encouraged. They were responsible for it. And it drips. It seeps. It wells from every crack in Western Christian civilization until it engulfs that civilization in a bloody sea. That's a very good quote there. So you see where it says that he's saying that the European Jews, when Nazi behavior by Europeans was slaughtering Africans, 400 years of enslavement, wiped out people of the Caribbean, wiped out the people who the land of the USA actually belongs to, these people were silent. However, when it started to wipe them out, maybe if they'd done something with other people being wiped out. Let me tell you a story. Joseph Ben Jacquelin, he had a great scholar. Dr. Ben is his colloquial name, kind of common name. Dr. Joseph Ben Jacquelin. The Italians were wiping out, remember under Mussolini, they invaded Ethiopia, and they were wiping out Ethiopians. They was putting them in mustard gas. Genocide was going on there. And some Ethiopian Jews, remember these original Jews, went to Europe, went to the European Jews and said, please help us, we are being wiped out in our land. And the European Jews gave them a few thousand, okay, here, take this money and go back, yeah, good luck. And I always remember the quote by Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben said, they didn't realize that 1935 was coming. They didn't realize that that same behavior was wiping out these African Hebrews. Was the same behavior was going to fall on their head. Dr. Ben said they didn't know that 1935 or 1939 was coming. So when you see injustice around you and you do nothing, when it falls on your head, what can people say? I hope you understand the point I'm making there. I think it was Martin Luther King says that when you're guilty yourself, if you see injustice and say nothing about it, you're just as guilty yourself. I continue. When I see an Arab with his hunted look, suspicious, on the run, wrapped in those long, ragged robes that seem to have been created specially for him, I say to myself, Mr. Maloney was wrong. Many times I have been stopped in broad daylight by a policeman who mistook me for an Arab. When they have discovered my origins, they were obsequious in their apologies. Of course, we know that a Martinian is quite different from an Arab. I always protested violently. But I was also told you don't know them. Indeed, Mr. Manoni, you are wrong. For what is the meaning of this sentence? European civilization and its best representative are not responsible for colonial racialism. What does it mean? Except that the colonialism is a business of adventurers and politicians. The best representatives, in speech marks, remaining well above the battle. But Francis Jenson says every citizen of a nation is responsible for the actions committed in the name of that nation. 100%. I'll repeat that. Francis Jenson says every citizen of a nation is responsible for the actions committed in the name of that nation. Quote, day after day, that system elaborates its evil projects in your presence. Day after day, its leaders betray you, pursuing, in the name of France, a policy as foreign as possible, not only to your real interests, but also to your deepest needs. You pride yourself in keeping your distance from realities of a certain kind. So you allow a free hand to those who are immune to the most unhealthy climates, because they create these climates themselves through their own conduct. And if, apparently, you succeed in keeping yourselves unsullied, it is because others dirty themselves in your place. You hire thugs, and balancing their accounts, it is you who are the real criminals. For without you, without your blind indifference, such men could never carry out deeds that damn you as much as they shame those men. So some very powerful quotes in this book here. And I hope you can see the truth behind them as well. When people say, oh, it's nothing to do with me, I didn't do it. But you knew, you're part of the nation, you knew what your government was doing. At least you turn a blind eye if you knew nothing about it. How can you not know what's been going on for decades, centuries? This is Brother Jegna, this is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. And we are reading Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Marks. We're on page 68, chapter 4. I said just above that South Africa has a racist structure. Now I shall go further and say that Europe has a racist structure. And I think this is common sense, because who created the structure in South Africa? Except for Europeans, so it must have come, it's got to have an origin. It is plain to see that Monsieur Manoni has no interest in this problem. For he says France is unquestionably one of the least racialist minded countries in the world. Close speech marks. But glad that you are French, my fine Negro friends, even if it is a little hard for your counterparts in America are much worse off than you. France is a racist country, for the myth of the bad nigger is part of the collective unconscious. We shall demonstrate this presently in chapter 6. But let us proceed with Mr. Manoni. In practice, therefore, an inferiority complex connected with the colour of skin is found only among those who form a minority within a group of another colour. In a fairly homogeneous community like that of the Malagasies, where the social framework is fairly strong, an inferiority complex occurs only in a very exceptional circumstances, or in very exceptional cases. Once again, one asks the author to be somewhat more careful. A white man in a colony has never felt inferior in any respects. As Mr. Manoni expresses it so well, he will be deified or devoured. The colonial, even though he is in a minority, does not feel that this makes him inferior. In Martinique, there are 200 whites who consider themselves to be superior of 300,000 people of colour. In South Africa, there are 2 million whites against almost 13 million native people. And it has never occurred to a single black to consider himself superior to a member of the white minority. Very good point. While the discoveries of Adler and the no less interesting findings of Kuhnke explain certain kinds of neurotic behaviour, one cannot infer from them laws that would apply to to an immeasurably complex situations. The feeling of inferiority of the colonized is the correlative of Europeans' feeling of superiority. Let us have the courage to say this outright. It is the racist who creates inferior. So he's tearing down what Manoni said, that there was a germ within that person already before colonization that you should be inferior. And Fanon said that's rubbish. The feeling of inferiority of the colonized is the correlative to the Europeans' feeling of superiority. Let us have the courage to say it outright. It is the racist who creates his inferior. I hope you all understand that. The conclusion brings us back to Sartre. The Jew is one whom other men consider a Jew. That is the simple truth from which we must start. It is the anti-Semite who makes the Jew. Saying the same thing really there. What becomes of the exceptional cases which Manoni tells us? Quite simply, they are the instances in which the educators tell us. Quite simply, they are the instances of which the educated Negro suddenly discovers that he is rejected by a civilization, which he has nonetheless assimilated, so that the conclusion would come to this: to the extent to which Manoni's real typical Malagasy takes on the dependent behaviour. For all of us, all is for the best. If, however, he forgets his place, he takes it into his head to be the equal of the European. Then the said European is indignant and casts out the upstart, who, in such circumstances, in this exceptional case, pays for his own rejection of dependence with his inferiority complex. So that's kind of very deep there. So let me repeat this again. To the extent to which Manoni's real typical Malagasy takes on the dependent behaviour, so inferiority, all is for the best. If, however, he forgets his place, so he says that I'm equal, if he takes into his head to be the equal of a European, then the said European is indignant and casts out the upstart, who, in such circumstance, in his exceptional case, pays for his own rejection of dependence with an inferiority complex. Earlier we uncovered in certain of Manoni's statements a mistake, that it is the very best, the very least dangerous. In effect, he leaves the Malagasy no choice, save between inferiority and dependence. These two solutions accepted, there is no salvation. When the Malagasy has succeeded in forming such relations of dependence with his superiors, his inferiority no longer troubles him. Everything is all right. When he fails to establish them, when his feeling of insecurity is not assuaged in this way, he suffers a crisis. The primary concern of Monsieur Manoni was to criticize the methods hitherto employed by the various ethnographers who had turned their attention to primitive peoples. But we see the criticism that must be made of his own work. And this is a quote from Manoni, I believe. Having sealed the Malagasy into his own customs, after having evolved a unilateral analysis of his view of the world, after having described the Malagasy within a close circle, after having noted that the Malagasy has a dependency relationship towards his ancestors, a strong tribal characteristic, Mr. Manoni, in defiance of all objectivity, applies his conclusions to a bilateral totality, deliberately ignoring the fact that, since Galeni, the Malagasy have ceased to exist. What we wanted from Manoni was an explanation of the colonial situation. He notably overlooked providing it. Nothing has been lost. Nothing has been gained. We agree. So I agree with that. So we're going to take a short break in a moment, but the point he's making now, I think, is a very good point, that Manoni, he should be making an explanation of the colonial situation, but he's not doing that. What he's looking at is the inferiority, natural inferiority of the people, and natural superiority of another people. That's not analysing it. That's just saying what the system has been put in place. Equally, racism, for example. When Europeans or people from the racist group start to analyse it, how do they analyse it? They start to speak about the people who are facing racism. For example, our children are kicked out of schools at a crazy high number to other people. But who they'll blame the people. I think Dr. Ben once said that when they blame Africans for their own enslavement, it is the victors blaming the victims with their own victimization. So equally, when they speak about racism, they blame the people who are under the foot. They blame the people who are facing racism for their own victimization. I hope you all understand that. So we're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back on the other side. We'll have a short musical break. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. We are reading Black Skin, White Mouse. I must remind you that this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15. You can get Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. So we're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back on the other side.
Them never love the black shade. In the bleaching cream, them go bed. Oh, oh, oh. Love get caught within the system. Bleach, love for shave, love no stop trim. Stoop the big house and bling bling. No love themselves, so them bleach them skin. The lightning, see it clear the burn, brought up properly. Then from both falling, in on them lane and them alley. Why bleach out to look like girl and girl want look like dolly. Lava splash from hill to the valley. Should the shop fire upon the bleach there. I want them no bleach and them go beat again. Skin no peel, can't touch the street again. A week and all them gone on the feet again. Are you wine and the shop fire upon the bleach there. I want Keisha Paul and Peter there. Skin no peel, them can't touch the street again. Them get so weak and all them gone on the feet. Them say anything what black never need. So them start say your brown skin a do it. Now a pharmacy eyesight them all the reach lightning. Them burn up themselves with the bleach. Them same one no said them not take no speech. Some a tell I about them rolling deep. And when them sight the sun them play hide and seek. Flesh get the power by the worm and leech. Up on a feet. Try to shop fire upon the bleacher there. I want them no bleach and them go beat again. Skin a peel, can't touch the street again. We can hold them gone on the feet again. Are you wine and the shop fire upon the bleacher there. Want them no bleach and them go beat again. Skin a peel, can't touch the street again. Them get so weak and hold them gone on the feet. Them set them better than the swine and the trunk row. Puss and dog get them stoop so low. I listen lassie never teach them to live so. Gone astray themselves they don't know. Them up life get them noggin no thanks for. Full of negligence them no flourish and grow. Look what happen when the elders them bleach out. For the children no eye sample no show the rainbow. Never pitchy patchy like the bleach of them. I want them no bleach and them go do it again. Skin a peel, them can't get this street again. We can hold them gone on the feet again. Are you wine and dash a fire upon the bleach again? I want them no bleach and them go do it again. Skin a peel, them can't touch the street again. We can hold them gone on the feet again. Love get caught within the system. Bleach love for shave, love no stop trim. Stoop the big house and bling bling. No love themselves so them bleach them skin. A lightning, see it clear the burn, brought up properly. Take from both falling, in on them lane and them alley. Why bleach out to look like girl and girl want look like dolly. Love a splash from the hill to the valley. So dash a fire upon the bleach again. I want them no bleach and them go beat again. Skin a peel, them can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. I wine and dash a fire upon the bleach again. I want Keisha Paul, even Peter them. Skin a peel, them can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Them say anything what black never need. So them start say your brown skin a do it. Now a pharmacy eyesight them all a reach lightning. Them burn up themselves with the bleach. Them same one I said them not take no speech. I tell I wait about them rolling deep. When them said the sun them play hide and seek. Flesh get the power by the worm and leech up on a freak. Fire upon the bleach again. I want them no bleach and them go do it again. Skin a peel, can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Are you waiting? A dash of fire upon the bleach again.
Him one brethren, sell him for rice and peas. They didn't know there would be days like these. Now the human race in such a squeeze. Yeah. They never love, they never love, never love poor Marcos. Them never love him. They never love, they never love, never love poor Marcos. Yeah. Men like betrayer of Marcus Garvey. Brethren, sell him for rice and peas. They didn't know there would be days like these. Now the human race in such a squeeze.
Still stand strong, giving thanks and praise to the Almighty One, and looking forward to reach Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. They said I don't have no rights in a Babylon, because I don't know how the West was won. Neither I can't change their plan. The West is controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. That's why I say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Teach the youths them right, but not teach them wrong. Jackal up on the youths, cause the youths are strong. Look to Africa, that I feel your mama land. And down Africa, where you find Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Say, Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I care not what the people of this world want to say, neither what the people of this world want to do. Many are called, but the chosen are few. What you gonna do when Jaja call on you? I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Oh, Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I faced a lot of trials and tribulation, but through all of that I man still stand strong. Still giving praise to the Almighty One, and looking forward to reach Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. The bingy man name says, Zion, I'm coming home to you. They said I don't have no rights in a Babylon, because I don't know how the West was won. Neither I can't change their plan. The West is controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. Rastaman Zion, I'm coming home to you. Oh, Rasta says, Zion, I'm coming home to you. One more time. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I cannot what the people of this world want to say, neither what the people of this world want to do. Many are called, the chosen of you. What you gonna do when Jaja call on you? Rastaman says,
Greetings, family. I'm back again on the other side. Hope you enjoyed the little musical break. I hope you heard that second tune was by I Wayne called Bleacher. Talk about the people who like to bleach up their skin. When they see the sun, they run from the sun and the skins get damaged. And again, this is what we're really talking about. One of the lyrics in one of the lines in the song said, people say that everything black no reach. And it's the same thing we're talking about in the book. Whichever the colonial people were, they left their concepts there, and we continued them. So black people can't do this, and black people no good, and you can't trust. And we continue it. Yeah. So these are the concepts we need to shake out of our minds. We need to move forward with our own concepts and definitions of the world. Okay. When we hold this old colonial baggage, it's just negative. It's going to slow us down. It's going to make us not unite. We need to do everything that's going to bring us victory. And what's our victory? Victory for self-determination. And what's self-determination? We decide what we do, where we live, what we spend our money, what we do with our money. Okay? We cannot be dependent on people. Yeah? Our free people are people who are not dependent on other people. So that's kind of true self-determination. So this is Brother Jegna. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. We are reading Black Skins and White Masks by Frantz Fanon. We're on chapter 4 now. And I'm going to continue. Must remind you this show is sponsored by Glass R Us, 7307 Sisters Road, N15. You can get Glass R Us on 0208 800 6663. 0208 800 6663. Please go to Glass R Us for all your glazing needs. Windows, double glazing, tabletops, splashbacks, you name it, you can they'll sort you out. Double glazing, yeah? Please go to Glass R Us. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. So I'll continue with Frantz Fanon's book. There was no addition to the earlier psychic whole. If, for example, Martians undertook to colonize the Earth, not to initiate them into Martian culture, but to colonize them, we should be doubtful of the persistence of any Earth personality. Gardiner changed many opinions when he wrote, "To teach Christianity to the people of Alor would be a quixotic undertaking. It would make no sense insomuch as one would be dealing with personalities built out of elements that are in complete discord with Christian doctrine. It would certainly be starting out at the wrong end. And if Negroes are impervious to the teachings of Christ, this is not at all because they are incapable of assimilating them. To understand something new requires that we make ourselves ready for it, that we prepare ourselves for it. This entails the shaping of a new form. It is utopian to expect the Negro or the Arab to exert the effort of embedded abstract values into his outlook on the world when he's barely enough food to keep him alive. To ask a Negro of the Upper Niger to wear shoes, to say to him that he will never be a Schubert, is no less ridiculous than to be surprised that a worker in the Berlicht truck factory does not spend his evening studying lyricism in Hindu literature, or to say that he will never be an Einstein. Actually, in the absolute sense, nothing stands in the way of such things, nothing, except the people in question's lack of opportunities. But they do not complain. Here's the proof, and this is a quote. At the hour before dawn, on the far side of my father and my mother, the whole hut cracking and blistered, like a sinner punished with boils, and the weather-worn roof patched there and there with pieces of gasoline tins, and this leaves bogs of rust in the dirty grey stinking mud that holds the straw together. And when the wind blows, all this patchwork makes a strange sound. First like something sizzling out of a frying pan, and then like a flaming board hurled into the water of a shower, or flying sparks. And the bed of planks from which my race has risen, all my race from this bed of planks, on its feet of kerosene cases, as if the old bed had elephantitis covered with goatskin, and its dry banana leaves, and its rags, the ghost of a mattress, that in my grandmother's bed. Above the bed is a pot full of oil, a candle end whose flame looks like a fat turnip, and on the other side of the pot, in letters of gold, Mercy. Wretchedly, this attitude, this behavior, this shackled life, caught in the noose of shame and disaster, rebels, hates itself, struggles, howls. And my God, others ask, what can you do about it? Start something? Start what? The only thing in the world that is worth the effort of starting? The end of the world, by God. So he's explained there that the poverty people live in, and how can you expect them? They've got no opportunities to be who they should really be, or what they have the option to be, or at least the potential to be. What Mr. Manioni has forgotten is that the Malagasy alone no longer exists. He has forgotten the Malagasy exists with the European. The arrival of the white man in Madagascar shattered not only its horizons, I just had to cough. The arrival of the white man in Madagascar shattered not only his horizons, but its psychological mechanisms. As everyone has pointed out, alterity for the black man is not the black man, but the white man. The island of Madagascar, invaded overnight by pioneers of civilization, in speech marks, even if those pioneers conducted themselves as well as they knew how, suffered the loss of its basic structure. Mr. Manoni himself furthermore says as much. The petty kings were all very anxious to get possessions of the white man. Explain that as one may in terms of magical totemic patterns. A need for contact with the awesome God of its proof of a system is a proof of its system of dependency. The fact still remains that something new had come into being on the island, and that they had to be reckoned with. Otherwise, the analysis is condemned to falsehood, to absurdity, to nullity. A new element having been introduced, it became mandatory to seek to understand the new relationship. The landing of the white man in Madagascar inflicted injury without measure. The consequences of the eruption of Europeans in Madagascar were not so psychological alone, since, as every authority has observed, there are inner relationships between consciousness and the social context. And the economic consequences, why colonization itself must be brought into trial. Let us go on with our study. In other words, the Malagasy can bear not being white. What hurts him cruelly is to have discovered first that he is a man, and later that men are divided into whites and blacks. If the abandoned or betrayed, Malagasy continues his identification. He becomes clamorous. He begins to demand equality in a way he had never before found necessary. The equality he seeks would have been beneficial before he started asking for it, but afterward it proves inadequate to remedy his ills. For every increase in equality makes the remaining indifferences seem more intolerable, for they suddenly appear agonizingly irremovable. Here again, we encounter the same misapprehension. It is of the course obvious to the Malagasy, who can perfectively well tolerate the fact that he's not being a white man. A Malagasy, or rather, no, not he's a Malagasy, but rather in an absolute sense he lives in Malagasy-hood. If he is a Malagasy, it's because of the white man has come. And if at a certain stage he has been led to ask himself whether indeed he is a man, it is because his reality as a man has been challenged. In other words, I begin to suffer from not being a white man to the degree that the white man imposes discrimination on me, makes me a colonized native, robs me of all my worth, my individuality, tells me that I am a parasite on the world, that I must bring myself as quickly as possible into step with the white world, that I am a brute beast, that my people and I are like a walking dung heap that disgustingly fertilizes sweet sugarcane and silky cotton, that I have no use in the world. Then I will quite simply try to make myself white. That is, I will compel the white man to acknowledge that I am human. But, Mr. Mononi will counter, you cannot do it because in your depths there is a dependency complex. Not all peoples can be colonized, only those who experience this need for dependency. And a little later, wherever Europeans have founded colonies of the type we are considering, it can safely be said that their coming was unconsciously expected, even desired by the future subject peoples. Everywhere there existed legends foretelling the arrival of strangers from the sea, bearing wondrous gifts for them. It becomes obvious that the white man acts in obedience with an authority complex, a leadership complex, while the Malagasy obeys a dependency complex. Everyone is satisfied. When the question arises of understanding why the European, the foreigner, was called Vazaha, which means honourable stranger, when it is a matter of understanding why shipwrecked Europeans are well welcomed with open arms, why the Europeans, the foreigners, was never thought of as an enemy, instead of explaining these things in terms of humanity, of a goodwill, of courtesy, basic characteristics of what Cesar calls the old courtly civilizations. Scholars tell us that it happened quite simply because inscribed in fateful hieroglyphs, specifically the unconscious, there exists something which makes the white man the awaited master. Yes, the unconscious. We have got to that, but one must not extrapolate. A negro tells me his dream. I had been walking for a long time. I was extremely exhausted. I had the impression that something was waiting for me. I climbed barricades and walls. I came into an empty hall. And from behind a door, I heard a noise. I hesitated before I went in, but finally I made up my mind and I opened the door. In this second room, there were white men, and I found that I too was white. When I tried to understand this dream, to analyze it, knowing that my friend has had problems in his career, I conclude that his dream fulfills an unconscious wish. But when outside of my psychoanalytic office, I had to reincorporate my conclusions with the context of the world. I will assert, number one, my patient is suffering from an inferiority complex. His psychic structure is in danger of disintegration. What has to be done is to save him from this, and little by little to rid him of that unconscious desire. 2. If he is overwhelmed to such a degree by the wish to be white, it is because he lives in a society that makes his inferiority complex possible, in a society that derives its stability from the perpetuation of his complex, in a society that proclaims the superiority of one race and the identical degree to which that society creates difficulties for him. He will find himself thrust into a neurotic situation. What emerges then is the need for a combined action on the individual and on the group. As a psychoanalyst, I should help my patient to become conscious of his unconscious and abandon his attempts at a hallucinatory whitening, but also to act in the direction of change in the social structure. So there's a good line there. As a psychoanalyst, I should help my patient to become conscious of his unconscious and abandon his attempts at a hallucinationary whitening, but also to act in the direction of a change in the social structure. So what does he mean by that? You have to change society. You need to bring your unconscious conscious. You need to realize that becoming white is a hallucination. And lastly, you need to change the society you live in, because the structure are going to continue to make you sick and make you hallucinate into whiteness. And this is why the Society of Black Psychologists in the USA today, they are called loosely Fanonites. They believe in the teachings of Frantz Fanon, what we're reading now. And those three things there will give you a good idea about some of their work, is that we must make the unconscious conscious. And this is why this show is here as well, by the way. And we must make you must illustrate to the person as well that being something else other than yourself is a hallucination. You can only be black. You can only be an African. Why would you be anything else? You know how great that is? And thirdly, you need to change society. Okay, I continue. In other words, the black man should no longer be confronted by the dilemma, turn white or disappear. But he should be able to take cognizance of a possibility of existence. In still other words, if society makes difficulties for him because of his colour, if in his dreams I establish the expression of an unconscious desire to change colour, my objective will not be that of dissuading him from it, but advising him to keep his place. On the contrary, my objective, once his motivations have been brought into consciousness, it will be to put him in a position to choose action, or in brackets, or passivity, with respect to the real source of the conflict, that is towards the social structures. Hope you all understand that. Once you bring the unconscious into conscious, that person will be in a position to choose action with respect to the real source of the conflict, the real source of the sickness, of the neurosis. And that source is the social structures. Conscientious in his desire to examine the problem from every angle, Monsieur Manoni has not overlooked the investigation of the unconscious of the Malagasy. To this end, he analyzes 7 dreams, 7 narratives that open the unconscious to us, and in 6 of them we find a dominant theme of terror. 6 children and an adult tell us their dreams, and we see them trembling, seeking flight, unhappy. The cook's dream: I was being chased by an angry black bull. Terrified, I climbed up a tree and stayed there until the danger had passed. I came down again, trembling all over. The dream of a 13-year-old boy, Rehevi. While going for a walk in the woods, I met 2 black men. Oh, I thought, I am done for. I tried to run away, but I couldn't. They barred my way and began jabbering in a strange tongue. I thought they were saying, well, we will show you what death is. I shivered with fright and begged, please, sir, let me go. I am frightened. One of them understood French, but in spite of that, they said, we are going to take you to our chief. As we set off, they made me go in front, and they showed me their rifles. I was more frightened than ever, but before reaching their camp, we had to cross a river. I dived deep into the water, and thanks to my presence of mind, found a rocky cave where I hid. When the 2 men had gone, I ran back to my parents' house. Josette's dream. The dreamer, a young girl, got lost and sat down on a fallen tree trunk. A woman in a white dress told her, that she was in the midst of a band of robbers. The account goes on. I am a schoolgirl, I said, trembling, and I lost my way here, and I was going home from school. And she replied, follow the path, child, and you will find your way home. Dream of a 14-year-old boy, Razefi. He is being chased by a Senegalese soldiers who make a noise like galloping horses as they run and show their rifles in front of me. The dreamer escapes by becoming invisible. He climbs a stairway and finds the door of his home. A dream of Elphine, a girl in 13 or 14. I dreamed that a fierce black ox was chasing me. I was big and strong. On his head, which was almost mottled with white, he had 2 long horns and sharp points. Oh, how dreadful, I thought. The path was getting narrower. What should I do? I perched myself in a mango tree, but the ox rent its trunk. Alas, I fell among the bushes. Then he pressed his horns into me. My stomach fell out, and he devoured it. Raza's dream. In this dream, the boy heard something. Someone say at school that the Senegalese were coming. I went out of the schoolyard to see. The Senegalese were indeed coming. He ran home, but our house had been dispersed by them too. Dream of a 14-year-old boy. C. I was walking in the garden and felt something like a shadow behind me. All around me the leaves were rustling and falling off, as if a robber was hiding among them, waiting to catch me. Wherever I walked up and down the alleys, the shadow still followed me. Suddenly, I got frightened and started running, but the shadows took great strides and stretched out this huge hand to take hold of my clothes. I felt my shirt tearing and screamed. My father jumped out of bed, and when he heard me scream, I came over to look at me, but a big shadow had disappeared, and I was no longer afraid. So these are all dreams. Some 10 years ago, I was astonished to learn that the North Africans despise men of colour. So that's very interesting. North Africans are Arabs, yeah? Some 10 years ago, I was astonished to learn that North Africans despise men of colour. It was absolutely impossible for me to make any contact with the local population. I left Africa and went back to France without having fathomed the reason for this hostility. Meanwhile, certain facts had made me excuse me, I just lost my page. Meanwhile, certain facts had made me think the Frenchman does not like the Jew. Who does not like the Arab? Who does not like the Negro? It's very interesting. The Arab is told, if you are poor, it is because the Jews have bled you and taken everything from you. The Jew is told, and you are not the same class as the Arab because you are really white and because you have Einstein and Bergson. The Negro is told, you are the best soldiers in the French Empire. The Arab think that you are better than you. But they are wrong. But that is not true. The Negro is told nothing because no one has anything to tell them. The Senegalese trooper is a trooper. The good soldier under command, the brave fellow who only knows how to obey. You no come in? Why not? Me no know. You no come in. Until you unable to stand up to all the demands, the white man sloughs off his responsibilities. I have a name for this procedure, the racial distribution of guilt. I have remarked that certain things surprise me. Whenever there has been any attempt at insurrection, the military authorities have ordered only colored soldiers into action. They were men of colour who nullified the liberation efforts of other men of colour. Proof that there is no reason to universalise the procedure. If those good-for-nothings, the Arabs, took it in their heads to revolt, it was not in the name of any acceptable principle, but purely and simply in order to get rid of their bigot, unconscious. From the African point of view, a coloured student said at the 25th Congress of Catholic Students during its discussions of Madagascar, I wish to protest against the dispatch of Senegalese troops there and the misuse that is being made of them. We know from our sources that one of the torturers in the Tanarive police headquarters was a Senegalese. Therefore, since we know all this, since we know what the archetype of the Senegalese can represent in Malagasy, the discoveries of Freud are no use to us here. What must be done is to restore this dream to its proper time. And this time is the period during which the 80,000 natives were killed. That is to say, one of every 50 persons in the population, and to its proper place. And this place is an island of 4 million people, at the centre of which no real relationship can be established, where dissension breaks out in every direction, where the only masters are lies and demagoguery. One must concede that in some circumstances the soucious is more important than the individual. I recall what Pierre Naville wrote. To speak of society's dreams as one speaks of the dreams of an individual, to discuss collective will to power as one discusses individual sexual drive, is to reverse the natural order of things once more. Because, on the contrary, it is the economic and social conditions of class conflicts that explain and determine the real conditions in which individual sexuality expresses itself. And because the content of human beings' dreams depends also on the last analysis, on the general conditions of the culture in which he lives. The enraged black bull is not the phallus. The two black men are not the two father figures, the one standing for the real father and the other for the primal ancestor. Here is what thorough analysis could be found on the same basis of Mr. Manoni's conclusions in his section, The Cult of the Dead and the Family. The rifle of the Senegalese is not a penis, but a genuine rifle, model label 1916. The black bull and the robber are not lolos, reincarnated souls, but actually the eruption of a real fantasies into sleep. What does this stereotype, this central theme of dreams, represent? If not the return to the right road. Sometimes we have black soldiers, sometimes black bulls, speckled with white at the head, sometimes outright. A white woman who is quite kind. What do we find in all these dreams? If not that this central idea, to depart from routine is to wander into pathless woods. There you will meet the bull who will send you running, helter-skelter, home again. Settle down, Malagasys, and stay where you belong. Having described the Malagasy psychology, Monsieur Manoni takes it upon himself to explain the colonialism reason for existence. In the process, he adds a new complex to the understanding catalogue, the Prospero complex. It is defined as the sum of all those unconscious neurotic tendencies that delineate at the same time, the picture of the paternalist colonial and the portrait of the racialist whose daughter has suffered an imaginary attempted rape at the hands of an inferior being. Prospero, as we know, is the main characteristic of Shakespeare's comedy, The Tempest. Opposite him, we have his daughter, Miranda, and Caliban. Towards Caliban, Prospero assumes an attitude that is well known to Americans in the southern United States. Are they not forever saying that the niggers are just waiting for the chance to jump on the white women? In any case, what is interesting in this part of his book is the intensity to which Mr. Manoni makes us feel the ill-resolved conflicts that seem to be at the root of the colonial vocation. In effect, he tells us what the colonial in common with Prospero lacks is an awareness of the world of others, a world in which others have to be respected. This is the world from which the colonial has fled because he cannot accept men as they are. Rejection of the world is combined with the urge to dominate, an urge to which is infantile in origin, and which social adaptation has failed to discipline. The reason for the colonial himself gives for his the reason the colonial himself gives for his flight, whether he says it was the desire to travel, or the desire to escape from the cradle, or from the ancient parapets, or whether he says that it was simply wanted a freer life, is of no consequence. It is always a question of compromising with the desire for a world without men. If one adds that many Europeans go to the colonies because it is possible for them to grow rich there, that the rare exceptions to colonial is a merchant, or rather a trafficker, one will have grasped the psychology of the man who arouses in the Autochthonist population, that is the indigenous population, the feeling of inferiority. As what for the Malagasy the dependency complex, at least, is the only form in which we can reach it and analyze it. It too proceeds from the arrival of the white colonizers on the island. From its other form, from its original complex, in its pure state that supposedly characterized the Malagasy mentality through the whole pre-colonial period, it appears to me that Mr. Manoni lacks the slightest basis on which to ground any conclusions applicable to the situation, the problems or the potentialities of the Malagasy at the present time. So that is the end of chapter 4. My own view, when we're just reading there and those dreams and they saw black bulls or the Senegalese, to me, my analysis of that would be that the black bulls represents black people, and it's like a fear there. So even black people, because these are Malagasy people, I believe, had a fear of blackness. I remember Frances Cress Welsing in her book, The ISIS Papers, and she speaks about the colours, the power of colours. For example, if you look at like a billiard table, and you have the white ball, which is a cue ball, and what does the white ball do? It knocks all the other balls down into the pockets, yeah? The red balls go down, the green, the brown, the blue, it knocks all the balls down. So at the end of the game, the white ball is on the table. So this is the concept, because amazing, Europeans, that game was created for the European mind. Why is it that the white ball knocks all the other balls down? And at the end of like the table is green, beige, like it's land. And at the end of the game, the person who wins has knocked down most of the colours out of the way. So this is the way Frances Cress Welsing analysed things. Symbolism is very powerful. I think symbolism we really need to understand. Our ancestors were the masters of symbolism. If you think of the ankh, for example, the ankh represents eternal life generally, and protection as well. So the symbolism is very powerful. Remember they made the pyramids and the Sphinx. Imagine if you lived 6,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, and you saw the pyramid. What would you think? What would the effect have on your psychology? So coming back to blackness, I remember Frances Welsing said in the ISIS Papers that blackness for Europeans is a fear of them, or a fear for them, I should say. And she said that it's quite strange that after the Spanish united, Ferdinand and his wife, they united the two houses, the two royal houses of Spain. They kicked the Moors out of Spain. And when they kicked the Moors out of Spain, bullfighting became very popular. And what was bullfighting? Fighting the black bull. And she said the symbolic is that they have to kill the black bull. I think you've seen, or you've got an idea about how bullfights work. You can still see these things on YouTube. It's not a very good, nice sight because they kill the bull. They'll stick it was full of spears, and eventually they kill it in the end. But she said it's very relevant that fighting these black bulls, bullfighting, became very popular after they kicked the Moors out of Spain. Who were Moors? Africans who ruled Spain for 774 years, who actually brought them civilization, taught them how to wash. And the more, why the bullfighting thing? So symbolism, she said, is very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. Europeans, talk about symbolism, they call the gun. What do they call the gun? The name they have for the gun. And the name they have for the gun, the pistol, is the great equalizer. What are they equalizing themselves about? Because Frances West Wells, she said she studied and studied. Said, why do white people like to kill all other people of color? What is it in their psyche? And she said that the Europeans went around the whole world, and everywhere they went, they saw people of color, of varying shades of color. And they realized, that's when they realized that, oh, we're white people and we haven't got a color. And to them, was scared. Because remember, genetically, white genes are recessive. And black genes in particular are dominant. And black people can actually erase the white race just by having relationships with their women. Because the only way you get a white child is by a white man and a white woman. Any other colour woman or any other colour man, you do not get a white child. And this is the fear of them. And this is why they exterminate people. So when they call the gun the great equalizer, I think you may understand to say that the gun can equalize what they can do with their genetic material. We've got a gun, we can wipe them out. So symbolism is very important to understand things, and that's why they left their own symbols there. So I think I said last week they got that song. It's a blues song. If you're white, you're all right, and if you're brown, stick around, and if you're yellow, just mellow. But if you're black, get back, get back, get back. It's a blues song, yeah. So again, everywhere where Europeans ruled, they left that concept in the minds of the people that if you're white, you're all right, and in every colour, in varying degrees, but particularly when you get to black, you've got to get back. So this is when we believe their definition, we actually believe ourselves. That's why that song I played earlier by I Wayne is about bleaching skin. Why do people bleach their skin? One of the key places in Jamaica, or one of the key places in the Caribbean where they bleach their skin is in Jamaica. Great deal of skin bleaching goes on there. I believe in Africa, I read somewhere, I haven't got to research myself, but I read somewhere the key place they use bleaching skin creams in West Africa, for example, is in Nigeria. So what concepts, this is from my own research, what concepts could make them want to bleach their skin in these nations? My own research is that the image of God. They gave us this image of Jesus. In Jamaica, they have more churches per square mile than anywhere in the whole world. Did you hear me? The nation with the most churches per square mile is in Jamaica. And in Jamaica, all these churches have got the image of whiteness because Jesus, they put there as white. And we find that one of the key places where they bleach the skin is in Jamaica. That's what that's tuned by I Wayne in Jamaica was about bleaching. They bleach out their skin. In Nigeria, where it's reputed that the key part or the key nation which uses skin bleaching is in Nigeria, they put up big statues very recently of a Jesus, a white Jesus. So why would a nation which is like 99%, 98%, 97%, whatever it is, black African, put out images of God which is white? What could be in their psyche to make them think that God could be white? But white skin and a white God. Remember, if you listened before I wrote this book here, I read the book Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, and he said clearly in that book, and this has been studied by many years ago, over centuries ago, by certain scholars, and they said that when you have an image of God that doesn't resemble you, you see yourself as less than, as not godly, as not divine. So if you see her as a black person, imagine you're a black child and you see God as white, and you think to yourself, well, I'm not white, I'm actually dark coloured skin. What's going to go through your mind? So one of the reasons why Christianity gave us these images of God was for this reason, to dominate our minds. And it's not me saying it, but it's, oh, how'd you know this? Because they wrote it down. They wrote down. There's a book called The Golden Throne, written by a colonist. He says that our job is to destroy their culture, and then we can pose whichever we want to on the ruins. Or King Leopold of Belgium, he says that we're not sending you there to teach Africans about Christianity and God, because they know about that. We're sending you there so you can make life easier for our soldiers and for our traders and stuff like that. So they said clearly that the reason why they gave us God was not because they want us to go to heaven. Because why they want us to go to heaven when they're murdering us and raping us and stealing everything we got? Our nation, gold, silver, diamonds, all looted out of the nations. All these nations were impoverished 400 years ago, full of gold. If you look in the Bank of England, do you know how much gold is in the Bank of England? I see on TV once they got all this gold. Where do they get gold from? Is there gold bars in England? I don't think so. They won't dig up from the ground. So where did they get this gold from? They raped Africa for centuries. And they sent their missionaries to Africa. Over and over again. Even Australian missionaries went to Africa. Why would an Australian missionary go to Africa to Christianize these African people? In Australia, what do they do with the black people they found there? They wipe them out. In a book written by Europeans, should I tell you what they said? Unfortunately, they used to hunt the men down like they was animals and kill them. Then they cut the men's heads off, and then they used to tie their heads to the women, and then they'd rape the women. They're what they like to call aborigines. And the children, sadly, they used to bury the still children in the ground, and they had shoes like clogs, wooden clogs, and they kicked the children's heads off. So you can see what the Australians actually felt about black people. So why would an Australian missionary go to Africa to Christianize the Africans? Was it out of love? Actions speak louder than words, and their behavior showed that it was not love there. So unfortunately, they give us these concepts of the divine to dominate us even more. And that's why you see churches all over Africa. One of the cities I can't remember the sister said, but there's hundreds of churches in one town. Hundreds of churches in one town. So it was a policy of a government policy. So you send the missionaries in there. And when you send the missionaries there, it becomes easier for the traders to do their business. Because now when they see this white person, they see this white person as maybe one of God's people. And even unconsciously, we act differently when we see these people. So this is where we are, people. So we just finished chapter 4. We'll start chapter 5 next week. But coming back to the black bulls, again, I think the black bull in the dream represents blackness, which is dangerous, a threat. That's why they felt fear and they were shaking. That is my own view. And if you get the book by Frances Cress Welsing called The ISIS Papers, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, she passed away, I think it was last year. Her book is called The ISIS Papers. It's called The Keys to the Colours, and she explains symbolism and the power of colours, And I mentioned about the billiard game, and I remember about the black bull. This is only a few things of the stuff, and the great equalizer as well. So anyway, I always say this, what we do for ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves. And what we think about ourselves depends on what we know about ourselves. And what we know about ourselves depends on what we've been taught about ourselves. So as you can see, the book I've just been reading, what do African people think about themselves? The Malagasy, I can't remember the terms he said, but they're the dirt of the ground on which the sugar cane grows. You are nothing. Unfortunately, we've still got that sort of mentality in us. We need to shake it out of us. Okay, so anyway, this is Brother Jegna. I'll continue the book next week. We'll be starting chapter 5. Black Skin, White Marks by Frantz Fanon, very powerful book. So we need to do your own research. We need to do our own research. And have a great week. I'll be back again next week, okay? So we'll continue again. And this is Brother Jegna tuning out. One love. Have a great week.
If we try, come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Look around and then I see a little old man and a homeless lady. They don't have no food to eat. Father, give them a warm place to sleep. Come on, wake up the people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up people, wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up people, wake up now. Storms will come and storms will go. The earth may quake and still the souls of the ones we love, and some will die.
Some shall
But
die.
they're in heaven, so dry your eyes.
Dry your eyes.
Celebrate life.
Don't you cry.
Jump for joy.
Jump for joy.
Like a baby with a toy.
Little baby.
Wake up, people. Wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people. Wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people. Wake up.
Dry your eyes.
Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up now.
Don't you cry.
Wake up the people. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up. Wake up now. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up now.
Wake up.
The storms will come and the storms will go. The earth may quake and still the soul